Welcome to Drumbeats, the must-listen-to podcast which explains why Indigenous partnerships are the key to securing successful outcomes in natural resource and infrastructure investment in Canada. I'm Mark Magnacca. Today on Drumbeats, my co-host Rob Brandt and I are joined by Alex Fallon, CEO of Birch Dene Nation Development Incorporated, who are leading one of the most interesting economic development opportunities in Saskatchewan's resource sector. Alex brings a national and an international perspective to the table. He's the founder and chair of the Western Canada Economic Forum, and for 14 years has served as British Honorary Consul to Saskatchewan, helping to connect capital, trade, and opportunity between Indigenous nations and international markets. In this episode, you'll hear how Indigenous nations are securing early-stage economic positions in critical minerals, using nation-owned corporations to build lasting prosperity, preparing for opportunities in uranium, small modular reactors, and energy projects that could reshape Western Canada's economy for generations. Preparing for opportunities in uranium, small modular reactors, and energy projects that could reshape Western Canada's economy for generations. This conversation serves as a roadmap for Indigenous communities to build capacity, launch nation-owned businesses, and prepare to become long-term equity partners, not just observers in significant projects. Let's get started. Welcome to our podcast, Alex Fallon, CEO of the Birch Dene Nation Development Incorporated. Great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Mark. Great to be here today.
Hi, Alex. Great to see you again. Thanks for taking the time.
Hey, Rob, you too. Nice to see you again.
Alex, you wear a number of hats. So why don't, for our viewers in the UK who might recognize an accent hidden deep in there in your Canadian accent, tell us a bit about yourself, your background, and how you've got to where you are today, because you've been over in Canada for a number of years, but also representing the UK and now Indigenous nations.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, Mark. I was looking forward to this podcast and our chat because my kind of role and experience, I think, fits very well with what you folks are doing with the summit. So yeah, I grew up in Saskatchewan, so prairie boy at heart. But as a young guy, as about 13, 14, I moved to the UK. So in the UK, I went to school in a sunny place called Sleaford, Lincolnshire, if you know where that is. University, started working for the UK government, etc. Long story short, moved back to Saskatchewan about 15 years ago. And during that time, through kind of twists of fate, my role has been very much in economic development and UK-Canada relations. So as you mentioned, I'm the CEO of the BNDDI, which is an Indigenous Economic Development Corp. I'm also founder and chair of the Western Canada Economic Forum, which gives me great insight into all things Western Canada, resources, agriculture, energy, and all that. And then about 14 years ago, because I'm not busy enough, I had the good fortune of being appointed as the British Honorary Consul to Saskatchewan to help on that Saskatchewan-UK relationships. So economic development of First Nations, kind of the Western Canada outlook and knowledge, and then the UK-Saskatchewan relationship. So all comes together in terms of what I do on a day-to-day basis.
Wow, that kind of follows the shifting of gravity of Canada as it's moved gradually to the west, and the Western provinces have played an even greater role in Confederation over time.
Yeah, agreed. I think, that whole natural resources sector across the West, and then with the ports, the logistics, the infrastructure for that trade and exporting to the world in BC. Western Canada is such an interesting kind of big market at the moment, which is great.
And Alex, this isn't the first time you've worked with a First Nation, but tell us a little bit about Birch Dene Nation.
Yeah, really opportunity. So I started in this role probably just under a year ago. And really interesting opportunity because Birch is a small community, small nation, north Saskatchewan, beautiful location right by Turner Lake. And across the lake is a uranium mine being developed by NexGen, which I'm sure you've heard of. So I think once it's in operations, it'll be maybe the largest uranium mine in Saskatchewan. So you've got this small nation, about 800 members in total, very remote North Saskatchewan, and a huge opportunity for economic development with the mine site being developed. And then you've also got the Paladin mine site, which kind of further down the road, and Denison as well. So I saw it as a great opportunity to kind of remain in the Indigenous economic development space, but such a unique opportunity for a small nation like that to have what we call mutual benefit agreement with such a large mining opportunity with NexGen, and been enjoying trying to win business, which is all what it's all about: is get involved in business and help the community grow and look for employment opportunities.
And before we talk about what you've been doing with Birch Narrows, maybe talk a little bit about what you did previous to that in the First Nation you worked with in Saskatchewan.
Yeah, so economic development career really started. I was in private industry with Cameco and other energy companies before moving to the government of Saskatchewan at the provincial level to do economic development. And then moved to the city level to do municipal economic development in Saskatoon. But then over that kind of 10-year period, just saw the emergence of Indigenous economic development, economic reconciliation, and just the uptake in business opportunities in that space. So I think 4 years ago, had the opportunity to join the Pegasus Cree Nations Economic Development Organization called Sparrowhawk, lead that organization for about 2 years. They've since moved that back into the nation, and then I've been focused on the forum and now with Birch Narrows. So seeing Indigenous economic development with two different nations, different locations, different sizes, different issues and opportunities, has been a great experience and learning opportunity for sure.
And at Pegasus, if I got that right, you were involved in a really interesting transaction with Royal Helium, and it's a great example of how we've seen Indigenous participation evolve over the years into some really interesting, more than just promises of jobs and maybe a royalty stream. But tell us a little bit about that transaction and why it's so unique.
Yeah, so our work with Royal Helium was really interesting. At Pegasus, at Sparrowhawk, we looked at what was going on in and around the traditional territory of the nation. And one of those things was there was huge land ownership from helium companies, exploration companies looking to develop the helium resource in Saskatchewan. Royal Helium was an interesting opportunity because they were at that time commissioning a helium plant in Alberta. And actually, during our discussions, they actually moved into production. So, which was a huge achievement and did some exports to the US. At the same time, they had some significant land holdings in Saskatchewan, again, near the nation. And we're like, this is a great opportunity for us to be involved in the development of that resource. So we worked with Royal Helium for a long time, developed an MOU for an investment, and we were looking at other government programs that could support that investment. So for example, there's the Saskatchewan Indigenous Investment Finance Corp that provided loan guarantees to certain types of projects, especially in the resource sector. Now, Royal Helium went through some changes. I think there's been a change of ownership. We never kind of finalized that investment. But it was a good example of a First Nation looking to get involved early in the critical mineral space, work with a company, develop a framework for a deal, and kind of be ready to move. Market conditions and corporate restructuring kind of prevented that. But it was such an interesting process to get a First Nations involved in that opportunity.
I think that just reinforces the importance of Saskatchewan in terms of mining and critical minerals across the board. And, it's one of the largest producers of potash in the world. Can you talk a little bit about the Saskatchewan's critical minerals strategy and the overall market?
Yes, Saskatchewan's got such a unique natural resources history. And I hate to admit it, but when I first moved to the UK, people would say, "Where are you from?" And for the first while, I would say Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and they couldn't pronounce it. They'd never heard of it. They didn't know where it was, and you kind of got tired of trying to explain it, especially in just informal chit chat. So I started saying I'm from near Calgary because that was terrible. My Saskatchewan friends are gonna think not gonna be happy with that. But that was kind of, so this was, gosh, 1993, 92. So at that time, yeah, Saskatchewan wasn't really talked about in the UK. And I say close to Calgary, we're about a 6-hour drive from there. So that gives you an indication of the space. But, the Saskatchewan story really started with this bread basket of the world concept, where we were, I think, the largest exporter of wheat in the world. And that was kind of the foundation of Saskatchewan. It wasn't until years later, I think it was the 60s, but we should fact check that, where Saskatchewan moved into uranium production. You mentioned potash being one of the world's largest exporters of potash, producers of potash. And you had this agriculture, mainly wheat, uranium, potash mix. But then from there, it's really developed the agricultural resources. So now, from bread basket of the world, I view it very much as a global grocery store, where we've got the wheat, but it's lentils, peas, canola, mustard, flax seeds, etc. So that agriculture sector is just enormous. Uranium, potash, foundations to the economy, but now critical minerals. And so looking to develop those minerals in Saskatchewan, like helium, is kind of, I think, an evolution for the Saskatchewan economy. And that's why I think it's such an exciting point, because it's growing our products, so to speak, and getting those to the world and getting global investors involved in this opportunity.
Yes. And so when you speak about that, just thank you for providing the background. And I'm sure, besides not knowing where Saskatchewan is, but it's in the center of the country, I think just slightly west of center, because that's Manitoba. But I guess in Saskatchewan, when you see the highway saying north, it has a different sensation. Because I always laugh at my friends here when you leave London and you're heading north. There's a big sign, the north, and you drive, 5 hours and you're there, right?
Exactly. Family and I did a road trip from Saskatoon to Vancouver over the summer, and it was about 18 hours. And that was just Saskatchewan, Alberta.
That's just going west.
That's just going west. So just huge. And that, I think, speaks to the resource opportunity, just the land mass. I think Saskatchewan has about 40% of Canada's arable farmland. So, but then the challenges of transport logistics, remote mining, huge farms, northern conditions, -30 weather, all those things. So very unique place in the economy.
Yes. And also the percentage of Indigenous people in the province is, I think, one of the highest, if not the highest, in the country.
Yeah.
If I'm correct.
Good point. The entire province of Saskatchewan, which I think is about the size of Germany, France, but huge. Current population is only 1.2 million. So I don't know how many neighborhoods of London that would be, but it's a fraction the size of the city of London. In this entire province, spread across 2 major cities, Regina and Saskatchewan, and then big rural communities as well. So again, that makes it a unique place, and challenges as well in terms of the workforce available. But on the Indigenous side, you're right, Mark. I mean, large Indigenous population, and specifically in terms of youth. So over the next 10, 15 years, that's going to grow. And, that's why employment for First Nations communities is so important, because it's the future, well, it's the present and also the future of Saskatchewan in terms of demographics.
Yeah, it is more ingrained. Indigenous participation in the economy in Saskatchewan is more ingrained, and there's a longer history of things like partnerships and meaningful involvement and Indigenous-owned businesses doing some pretty amazing things. What are you working on at Birch Narrows that's interesting?
Yeah, so at the moment, I mentioned we have this mutual benefit agreement, partnership agreement with NexGen. So we've already started doing some work with NexGen, which is fantastic. I have a couple of contracts with them to provide services at the mine site. So we're doing some work around waste management and also security and electrical. It's a great starting point, absolutely. But when you look at the NexGen site, I think it's been mentioned a $2 billion project, $2 billion investment, probably increasing since I looked. And they've made a commitment to spend a certain percentage with Indigenous nations and organizations. So that's, for a nation like Birch Narrows, that's $100 million-ish opportunity. And so I would say we're at the start. Electrical, some waste management, security, but it's like the sky's the limit in terms of what areas we can get involved in. There's shaft sinking and the underground mining and environmental monitoring and things like that to be done. So we're really focusing on that. In the process of finalizing an MBA with Paladin, was the fission organization. So obviously that uranium mining sector is huge for us, huge opportunity for us. The NexGen, Paladin, you got Denison down the way as well. But at the same time, we've all seen commodity markets go up and down, and nuclear industry, uranium's on at a growth stage at the moment. But there's that risk that at some point something could happen, the price could drop. Those mines slow down. And so because of that, we started looking at other opportunities as well, kind of outside the mining sector. So I think it's important to, our focus, priority, absolutely, is the resource sector in northern Saskatchewan. But, commodities go up and down, and it's looking at what else we can do. And so that's exciting because you can do a little bit of both.
Yes. And what about the transition in terms of your current role and what you've done in the past up till now? And all of a sudden the world changed at the beginning of this year, right? Our southern neighbor became unstable, to say the least, changed their priorities. And Building Canada Act, Prime Minister Carney won the election, got his mandate, trying to speed things up. How does the work you're doing fit in terms of some of these bigger projects that are going on? Because this is a sizable investment you're talking about.
Yes, good point, Mark. The U.S. has always been Saskatchewan's leading customer and market. And I think it will remain that way because it's just such a huge trading relationship. But kind of that instability, maybe, or uncertainty, kind of the changes you mentioned have, and I think this is a good thing, kind of accelerated Saskatchewan's need to diversify its markets. And to be fair to the government of Saskatchewan, they had already started this, recognized this, and started this process over the last several years. So you've seen Saskatchewan open up international trade offices. The UK office opened, years ago, but not decades. So
yes, and have done very well at
absolutely
raising the profile of Saskatchewan.
Yep, having that person in market and office every day, meeting with investors and partners is huge. You see Saskatchewan put offices, in Asia, India, and kind of across the world. So it's fortunate they've started that journey, diversify markets. Still, number one customer is the U.S. So that's interesting because it's starting to make the First Nations think about, exporting products to the world, not just to the U.S.
Here to that, Alex. And as Mark and you have said, Saskatchewan during my time in London was always visible. Premier has visited the office, the trade office, and participating in things like our summit last year. Big delegation from Saskatchewan.
Yeah.
And lots of international trade possibilities opening up more and more all the time. Do you see international investors outside North America taking a renewed interest in Canada and Saskatchewan in particular?
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned that, and time flies. I remember, I'm sure he wasn't the first premier to visit the UK, but I remember my first international mission with the Saskatchewan government to the UK with former Premier Brad Wall. And gosh, that would have been 2012-ish, I think, maybe 2011. And
he spoke to the Canada-UK Chamber of Commerce.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. That's probably where we first met, and Nigel and the team there, did a great job. And, we had a great turnout, and, I think that was the first time a lot of people in the audience heard the story about Saskatchewan. And since then, you've mentioned the work the current government Saskatchewan has done, Premier Mo, the UK office. So yeah, now people have heard the story once, they're hearing it again, and now they've kind of moved from the thought process of like, oh wow, interesting to hear that, interesting, and now they're like, oh, this is an opportunity, and how do we invest? So I think that kind of education and knowledge and interest journey has happened, and now we're moving to kind of investment discussions. And I saw the great delegation of Indigenous leaders that went to the summit in London. And, when I first saw that, I was like, what? I was like, wow, that's amazing. Some of the most significant leaders in Indigenous economic development in Saskatchewan going to the UK to talk about investments to a large UK and international audience. And now now we're like, okay, 10 years ago, never would have happened. It wasn't even being talked about. And if you'd said 10 years ago, you're going to the UK to talk to investors as an Indigenous economic development organization, people would be like, what? Why are you doing that? We don't even have our first investment in Saskatchewan, or we're working on our first couple. International markets, UK large investors, Saskatchewan, Indigenous. You wouldn't have believed it if someone told me this 15 years ago. So when the forum and the summit came along, and you see that delegation, it was just like a perfect kind of picture of how things have changed.
And I'm working on some things that touch on Saskatchewan that had their genesis at the summit. So, that delegation, those folks are believers in the value of outreach across the Atlantic.
Exactly. And I've seen this with the Western Canada Economic Forum too, where you start the first couple of years and you have this, these delegations come. Imagine it in 5 years or 10 years. I think the summit is going to be the stage where deals are getting announced, investments are getting announced, and more people are going to be interested. So it's exciting to see how you've gone from, there wasn't a summit back in my day to this summit gets pulled together. First year was great. It's gone like this. And it's like, okay, our strategic plan, what does that look like for 5 years now for a nation like Birch Narrows to be on that international stage? It's exciting to see it's exciting.
Great. Thank you for that. Just to come back, as your role of British Honorary Consul, what's the perspective now when you're talking to guests from the UK, potential investors, they're coming to Saskatchewan? How do they perceive Canada post-Brexit?
Yeah, it's the old story about Saskatchewan kind of being the place investors, international visitors fly over, right? They traditionally did these delegations, investor groups, probably fly into Toronto or Ottawa, look at some opportunities there. And they would, the stereotype is fly to Calgary, bypassing Saskatchewan. So that definitely happened a lot, especially 10, 15, 20 years ago. And I think that was still the case when I started in the honorary consul role. And part of the role was to help the UK government on that trade and investment relationship. Great consul general office in Calgary, managing Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. And I think now what you're seeing is investors are coming to the West. And so they might still start off in Toronto, but they will look at the West and it'll be Saskatchewan, maybe a night or two in Alberta, Calgary, Edmonton, and then maybe finish in BC. So it's gone from, kind of investors, I think, thinking of the opportunity as provincial, going to energy, we're going to the Global Petroleum Show in Calgary, and we're flying home. And now they're like, let's go to Saskatchewan, talk about oil and gas because we have a good energy sector. Let's look at other investment opportunities and maybe leave from Vancouver. So in my time as honorary consul, I've definitely seen this shift of, trying to get investors here. And now they're coming on their own and they're making a couple stops in Canada, which I think is great because to me, the opportunity, should never just be provincial, right? We're going to do investments in business in Alberta. It's like, well, you kind of erase these provincial borders and there's business opportunities, across Canada, but across the West, especially in the energy natural resources sector. So that's been a huge change that you can see on these delegations.
And what about the perspective of working through environmental legislation at the federal level and provincial level? Have you started to see some changes on that under Prime Minister Carney's leadership? Are they pushing it down more to the provincial level, or what's going on with that regard?
Yeah, I think Carney's made some good announcements and commitments, and maybe trying to shift the culture a little bit around that approval process, because you do have that unique situation of that provincial jurisdiction, and then the national I guess oversight or another approval process to go through. So too early to say what will happen, but the hope is that streamlines the regulatory process, gives investors certainty, and speeds up, in an environmentally conscious way, the development of the resource opportunities.
There have been some concrete steps on that.
Absolutely.
Just in the last few weeks, and I can't remember whether Saskatchewan is part of it or not. I'm sure they'll become part of it, if not yet. But Alberta, Manitoba, Ontario have all signed agreements with the feds where the federal government is going to relinquish and delegate some of its authorities to the provinces to reduce duplication and hopefully speed up some of these timelines for major projects.
Yeah, absolutely, Rob. Good point. And I think every year the Fraser Institute, one of the leading think tanks in Canada, does their, I forget the exact title of the report, but it's kind of like top investment jurisdictions in the world for natural resources. And Saskatchewan always ranks as far as I can remember, kind of 1 to 4, and often at the top of that. So that speaks to, yes, there's that environmental framework, but the overall kind of stability, and then the regulatory environment is still world class. And if we can speed that up a little bit, that's great. I know, kind of from a Birch Narrows angle, that there's nothing more important than the environmental regulations around these mine sites, especially in beautiful, natural, kind of untouched places like northern Saskatchewan.
Just building on that, coming back to your role also as chair and founder of the Western Canada Economic Forum, what do you see as the overall outlook, and what are some of the key issues members of the forum are talking about with you and other supporters of the forum?
Yeah, I think the way I look at it is each of the provinces, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, BC, each of those provinces have different opportunities and challenges. And I'll speak to those in a second. But then when you zoom out and look at it as a Western Canadian market and put all that together, it's like, wow, then you're really talking about all those key sectors. And I think, you look at Manitoba, strong manufacturing sector. It's been a transport and logistics hub with Centerport and access to the US market. I think for Manitoba, there's a defense opportunity now with you seeing the federal government moving in, or trying to accelerate investment into the defense sector. Manitoba is well positioned for that with the strong manufacturing sector, transport, logistics. Also, that Arctic Gateway opportunity, the Port of Churchill. We talked about diversifying trade markets, getting these Western Canadian commodities to market. Having another port, would obviously help that. Then I've mentioned Saskatchewan, agriculture, mining. You got obviously Alberta oil and gas, BC ag products, and so on. So I think they're unique, but I think for investors to think of it as one market and expanding into Canada, into the West, so much potential, and all of that, small population, and so we need more investors, we need talent, we need supply chain companies, we need companies coming here and setting up, and that's the opportunity, is the investment, but also being part of the opportunity in terms of having offices and being here in the business as well.
And maybe talk a little bit about the forum. What's in store for 2026?
Yeah, it's really about this uncertainty with the U.S. and how that impacts it, and kind of everything we've talked about. So that will be a big focus. Looking forward to hearing Premier Canoe speak about the opportunity for Manitoba. They've just, I think, 2 months ago, released a new economic growth strategy, and also, hearing from some of the business associations. So I think one really insightful one will be a talk from what is called the Western Business Coalition, which is a partnership between the Business Council of BC, Business Council of Alberta, the SAS Chamber, and the Business Council of Manitoba. They've really started working together around this. How do you use natural resources to drive Canadian and Western Canadian prosperity? So, and that's the unique thing about the forum. Traditionally there's been, a Saskatchewan Economic Outlook event, Saskatchewan speakers, Saskatchewan story to a Saskatchewan audience, and a lot of them know each other. And that's great. You absolutely need that. But when you, again, zoom out, have that Western discussion, and you have BC coming to the West, to Manitoba, to talk about their economic opportunity, that's that education we need, and kind of the mindset of, multiple opportunities across the provinces. You don't just need to invest in one.
When is the forum?
Right.
In 2026?
Yeah, coming up January 22nd and 23rd in Manitoba. We started the forum in Calgary. This year we're in Regina. Next year, Winnipeg. And similar to the summit, the kind of attention and speakers and audience is just growing each year. So it's been an exciting ride and hard work, as you know.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Alex, at last year's summit, there was the beginning of this discussion about the nuclear opportunity in Saskatchewan.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give us an update on what you're hearing at the moment in Saskatchewan in terms of that opportunity that faces not only the province, but the country?
Yeah, good point, Mark. I think that nuclear file is one of the most exciting kind of new opportunities in Saskatchewan for partners and investors. So again, going back years, it was uranium exports. We weren't doing much value added in the province. If any, it was all about exporting to other facilities, other markets. Now, that nuclear discussion has started. The opportunity for SMRs in Saskatchewan, I think, is huge for remote communities, even for the municipal population. And that one's going to need international partners. Saskatchewan is not a nuclear powerhouse at the moment. Obviously, Canada has a strong nuclear sector, specifically in Ontario. So seeing these partnerships with companies like Bruce Power, Ontario Power Generation is huge. And an indication of that is a few months ago, the Canadian Nuclear Association held the first, I'm pretty sure, Canadian Nuclear Association West conference. And it was hundreds of delegations. And that just speaks to the seriousness of this opportunity in Saskatchewan. Government has made it clear that, we're going to move down the nuclear path, going to look at SMRs, maybe larger scale in the future. And that's absolutely newish, recent policy direction, opportunity. So getting the supply chain ready for that. And there's an opportunity there for the UK in terms of, the nuclear industry and experience you have is huge. What partnerships exist there on the investment side, kind of the technology, the infrastructure opportunity is huge as well. So that's another exciting one, which years ago, we wouldn't have been talking about that. And so that's a real emerging opportunity, absolutely.
And would some of that power that would be generated also be flowing across provincial borders?
Yeah,
from what you've heard?
I think the possibility is there for sure. I know that happens in a lot of provinces with different energy producers. So, that would be exciting to see that happen. I think the first goal is kind of in Saskatchewan, but absolutely, if that sector grows and you can look at, again, that interprovincial cooperation and trade and opportunity would be fantastic. It's more markets for the provincial producers.
Yes, well, that will be amazing if and when
Exactly
small modular reactors set up in Saskatchewan. If you look at France today, and you compared that in terms of landmass earlier, 70% of power, obviously a different population level, but 70%, I think nearly 70% of the power is nuclear generated.
Yeah.
And it just gives us stability. And from a geographic perspective and stability, you can't ask for a safer place in Canada besides Saskatchewan.
Exactly. And I think a lot of that uranium in France for the nuclear fuel would have come from Saskatchewan, right? A large percentage of it. And so to see Saskatchewan kind of move down the value chain to become a nuclear, let's say, utility in the future is a game changer.
Wow, really something.
Alex Fallon, it's great of you to take time. It's been interesting talking to you, finding out what's happening in Saskatchewan. I know you've got our High Commissioner, Canadian High Commissioner to the UK, returning to Saskatchewan. He has returned to Saskatchewan, and he's been a great friend to First Nations and other Indigenous peoples while he was in his role in the UK. And I know you'll do well to have him back in Saskatchewan. But thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I look forward to being in London and attending the summit in a few months. So hope to see you there.
Great. And thank you, Alex. Look forward to seeing you then. And all this talk about Saskatchewan reminds me, I've got to get on the call again to Manitoba, where I was born, and say, come on, guys. Saskatchewan is telling their story very, very well. And as you said, there are huge opportunities for all the Western provinces, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and of course, British Columbia. So thank you very much for your time today, Alex.
Thanks, Mark.
It's been great to have you with us.
Thank you.
Thank you to Alex Fallon for sharing his insights with us. And thank you for viewing and listening. Mark your calendars for the upcoming 2026 summit taking place on the 8th of April. Be sure to share, subscribe, and leave a review on your favorite podcast channel. Thanks for listening to Drumbeats. Until next time.